Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Retained Recruiter Show. My name is James.
And I'm Jo. Nice to see everybody. Hope you've all had a great Easter. And for those who've had a break, and congratulations to those whose children have gone back to school.
Jo, nice to see you back. Missed you last week. Had a great session with Plarman where we sort of entertained the audience, hopefully, and gave them some good pieces of information. And if you've not seen that, please do feel free to catch up on the replay. Not you, Jo, but anybody else who's watching. So, yeah, we're back in our normal dynamic duo posture, just me and you today, Jo. And today we're talking about objection handling and how to turn no's into yeses. What else are we covering today, Jo?
So we're going to talk about the most common objections that you tend to get when you're trying to sell retainers. Then we're going to talk through the yes strategy to convert more prospects into saying yes. And then finally, we're going to talk about the four types of objections that you come across the most, but the reasons, the underlying reasons, and the lack. So we call them lacking objections. So we're going to talk you through those as well. And then hopefully give you some tips as to not only how to deal with objections, but I think also, James, just how to understand them a little bit more and how not to react to them emotionally.
Oh, we're going to be talking about amygdalas today, Jo.
We are going to be talking about amygdalas, yes.
So carry on listening in you'll know what the amygdala hijack is. That's going to be a good one a little bit later. Jo, before we get started, I just want to say something for our regular viewers and people who are watching this on replay or whatever it may be. Next week's session, we normally run these at 9:30 UK time, but next week, because we've got a US guest, a very special guest, actually US guest, I'm a liar, he's Canadian. Sorry, David, if you listen. We've got David Perry from Perry Martell next week is joining us, and so we're running the session next week at 3 p.m. just so he doesn't have to get up at 3:30 in the morning to sort of entertain us with his wit and wisdom. And I've met David before, done a webinar with him before. He's a fascinating guest, so hopefully looking forward to that. He's a highly experienced executive search consultant, and he'll talk about how he only works on that basis. So it's looking forward to sort of sharing some of those thoughts and views with him. So yeah, let's crack on with today then, Jo. Really, objection handling. What's the biggest objection to selling retainers?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's two, isn't there? But I think the biggest objection to selling retainers is we don't do retainers.
Exactly.
And what do we do about that then?
Well, I think we ignore it.
Yeah.
We soldier on. I think it is one of those things when you walk into a room, and I've done this many times, and I bet you have too as well, Jo. When you go into a meeting in classes, just before we start, just want you to know that we don't do retainers. You know, they get the objection in early. And it's a shame when that happens, but quite often it comes from a sense of the unknown, and quite often when you probe into why that's a policy, it's because they've had a bad experience before, Jo. I think that's the common thing. So I think it's not about ignoring it. It's about first of all sidestepping it, because if it comes early, we'll talk about when it comes in later into the conversation. But when it comes in early to the conversation, it's about sidestepping it. So listen, I understand you may have some concerns about that, but let me share with you what my proposition is, and then we can talk about the commercials later on if we're going to do business together. Because at the end of the day, and we've said this before, that when you attend a meeting with a prospect or a client, but normally a prospect because they're not converted into a client at that stage yet, or maybe even a customer, Jo. At that stage, it's all quite unnerving for them. But you've got in, they're not there, so you've got to decide when you're in that meeting. You have to understand that there's two of you in the meeting, let's say, or two sides to the equation. One of you has a problem and one of you doesn't. And the clue is you don't have the problem, they do. Any client or prospective client that's agreed to meet up with you is tacitly telling you that I have a problem. I'm not telling you what it is yet. It's your job to uncover that. But I have a problem in that, that's why I'm speaking to you, because no business owner or somebody who's running a business unit in commerce at this moment in time wakes up today and says, the best thing I can do today is meet a recruiter that I've never met before. So something you've done or said to arrange or engage that client with that meeting has said, okay, maybe you can help me. Maybe you are different. Maybe you're the one. And they're going to give you that opportunity. So they do it. They can come in very early, those objections, and you have to sidestep, not ignore it, but just have some phrases to say, listen, I understand how you might feel about that, but let me share with you how I work. At the end of that, we can talk about the commercial arrangements if it's appropriate for us to do something together. Because at this moment in time, let's not talk about how we're going to do that. Let's identify what the challenges you are facing. So tell me, Mr. Client, and move on, or Mrs. Client. On that basis, so just sort of move on from that basis. That'll be the first thing, Jo.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've changed my mind, actually. So when you said what's the biggest objection, it normally is, we don't do retainers. But actually, I've changed my mind. The biggest objection that you've got to overcome is your own. So we've had a lot of instances, haven't we, James, where we've had
Above your head, Joe.
members. Yes, this way, that way. There we are. If I can just find it with the reversed camera. Yes, the biggest objection you have to overcome is your own. We've had so many instances of members of the iIntro family who've gone out and they've met with clients and they've really built it up in their own minds. They've almost built the wall for the client. This big wall of defense, and when they go into the meeting, they almost lead the objection, or when they get the objection, they go, there it is. There it is, and they almost expect, they welcome the objection. This isn't just
thank God I don't have to sell a retainer. Thank God I can go back to the office and say it wasn't me. They wouldn't buy it.
Exactly. So the biggest objection that you have to overcome is your own. And this is about mindset. If I can get my finger in the right place. It's also about understanding what the purpose of this meeting or this interaction with this client is. Like you said, James, you can't ignore an objection. You've got to embrace the objection, but you've also got to see that the vast majority of the time, that's not the real reason why they can't or won't work with you. It's either something that you've led, because I truly believe that a lot of objections are cause and effect.
Yeah.
And we receive objections either because we've not worked hard enough to be different. Yeah. And so what we've got is the same standard objection they give to every standard agency who phones or meets with the standard way of going into it. So sometimes that's the reason. It's a cause and effect. So the easiest thing you can do with that is every action has a positive or negative reaction. So change your action and it will change the reaction. Yep. And why? And then the second thing is, really understanding why do we get these objections in the first place? So are we saying something that's the same that everybody says? In which case you're going to get the same. They don't know you from Adam. You could be the best recruiter on the planet, but if you sound like everybody else, they'll give you the same objection they give to everybody else. You don't even have to think about it. Think of the last time we got a phone call. For anyone who's still got a house phone, by the way, apologies if you're under the age of 35, because it's quite an old school thing to have a house phone and call it a house phone as well. Showing my age now. But when you get your house phone rings or you get stopped in the street, you're about to be sold to and you're not listening to what the other person is selling. They could be trying to offer you £1 million. You're thinking in your head, wait for a pause and then just spit out the thing that you think is going to make them go away in the fastest possible time. That's exactly the same thing that clients do. And the reason why they do that is because they've not got to know you, like you, and trust you enough yet to let you in. So if you can come at them with something different, show you're different, a lot of that comes from mindset and purpose. So the purpose of a meeting isn't to sell a retainer, is it? The purpose of a meeting is to consult and to ask questions and to uncover problems and to see if you can suggest some solutions. And if you can, brilliant. And if it works for both of you, fabulous. And if it doesn't, never mind. We'll move on to the next one. So I think our mindset drives our style of selling, if we use that term in inverted commas. And I also think that sometimes it creates the objection for us without us knowing that we're doing it. The second thing I was going to say is sometimes you're still going to get objections, like the people who come straight into the room and say, we don't do retainers, or, oh, the fee is too high, or, oh, no, we're happy working with who we are at the moment. All of this is perfectly fine. And now we'll talk about the amygdala, because a lot of the time when you're getting an objection, it's because you've asked them for something. You've asked them to do something differently to the way that they're used to doing it. Yeah. And your first initial reaction is an emotional one. It's a survival mechanism. It's the one that resists change. So if I say to James, let's work together. Obviously, I wouldn't do it like this, but let's work together and we'll work on a retained basis. That means you have to now change the way that you're used to working. And your amygdala, your emotional brain goes, no, we have to resist change. So it will blurt out whatever it needs to. Yeah, in order to stop and resist change. What we tend to do, though, is we take that objection as their final answer. What lives behind that, normally a couple of seconds later, if you can sidestep it and start questioning around the objection, is you get the logical response. So the first initial objection you're always going to get is an emotional response followed by logical. Now, the logical response is normally more measured. It's more, it's logical. It uses rationale, whereas an emotional response is just a response to being asked to change. There's two ways you can deal with that. The first one is to empathize and question around the objection to get that logical response. So you can start then talking to them logically about how this is going to save them time, money, reduce commercial downtime. Use that amygdala to your advantage, because, and we love this phrase, don't we? Emotion produces motion, doesn't it, James? So if you want someone to move out of their comfort zone, there's two ways of doing it. One is to either push them out of their comfort zone by making it a mildly uncomfortable place to live right now. The other one is to pull them over, pull them across using pleasure. So pain and pleasure, push and pull factors, which again, as recruiters, I'm not sure we do that very much, James.
No, I think one of the challenges, Joe, though, is so people listen, probably think, well, tell me how am I going to overcome the objection of, we don't do retainers. First of all, the challenge is, let's move it towards the end of the conversation, or, you've done your pitch. Sometimes because your pitch just isn't good enough. You're not offering, and I hate to use this phrase, your value proposition is poor. And what I mean by that, it's the same as everybody else's. So if all you're saying is, hey, listen, I do recruitment, I do it better than the rest of the market, I do it faster than the rest of the market, I can do it cheaper than the rest of the market, then, you still sound like the rest of the market. So when you say, well, okay, well, and by the way, for me, for the privilege of working with me, Mr. Clark, I've got 15 years or 20 years or 5 years experience in the industry, you're going to have to retain me, otherwise I'm not going to do it. Now, there's some people getting away with that, and I use that phrase carefully, getting away with that because the market's quite tough at the moment. So there's some clients who are desperate, and they give they'll just cling on to you in the belief that you'll be able to do it, and they'll risk a bit of a retainer. But when we're talking about retained assignments, we're talking about traditional third, and there are variants on that, of course, in terms of what you charge. But it's about taking the client on the journey of understanding that, here, and Joe used a great word earlier, it's about consulting with the client. It's about asking the questions. It's about establishing what their need is and sharing with the client, or the prospect, I should say, sharing with that prospect that what you've got a solution which is different. If it's not different, then you are going to struggle. Just put it on that way. Now, obviously, why am I talking about this? Well, here at iIntro, obviously, we provide an alternative solution to help recruiters offer some differentiation against the market. So I'm coming at this from a position of, knowing what we know in terms of when working with iIntro clients who actually have a differentiated process, a very transparent and visible process that means that when they're talking to the client, they can take them through how you're going to solve the problem. Not just by saying I've got 20 years experience and I know all the candidates you needed before you knew you needed them. Actually, it's not about that. So it's saying I've got a deliberate process that's very robust. It utilizes multiple layers of scientific and objective assessment. It's not a one-dimensional 20th century recruitment process. It's a multi-dimensional 21st century recruitment process. And when you've shown them that, and particularly when you've made it visible to the client, then actually, to be honest, the objections don't come, Joe. That mindset that you spoke about, and listen, I've done this. What you said before was so familiar to me when you said, you walk into the room expecting the objection, and guess what? You get it because your mindset is that you're in the wrong frame of mind to think this through. The way that we help, recruitment business owners and the teams sort of go into battle. Let's make it, put it on a war footing here. Go into battle is actually knowing that I've got something that nobody else has got. And therefore I've got the solution, not in an arrogant way, but in a very confident way that shows the client, listen, I know what I'm doing. I can show you what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. And if you believe me on that one, then you're going to work with me. And at the end of the day, you're going to pay me some money. Now we're talking about the commerciality of this. So when we get into that, again, Joe, you're so right. Again, that amygdala hijack is such that, it's there and it's that automatic response. And when you just reminded me about the home phone, which only my mother-in-law rings me on,
yes.
Same here. 89 this year. That when I get the response, either the double glazing or the doing soffits and whatever on my immediate. And by the way, just a nice little helpful tip for people. I'd say, I'm sorry, I just rent.
Yeah.
And that just closes down all those home improvements, even though I don't rent. Obviously you do own my own house. But again, that amygdala is that initial response is there. So what we've got to do is go around that way. So sometimes you've got to soften it because you will get that objection on certain occasions, particularly organizations which are very, very price focused. Now, you might be dealing with the wrong person who doesn't see the value in what you're doing, but you're going to have to do that. So, Joe, the old sales close or the old sales objection handling, feel, felt, found, it's said, well, listen, I understand how you feel. A lot of clients, when we first speak to them, felt the same way that you did. That buying, engaging with a recruiter on a retained basis is not going to be something that's up for them. But what they find, you're working on our process, is that we deliver results. We have 96% retention rate, which means you only have a 4% attrition rate versus a typical 20 to 30% attrition rate, etc., etc., etc. We've got all of those elements are there. But I just want to give one little tip whilst I think about it, Joe, if that's okay. So when you get that objection, one of the great ways to handle all types of objections is to softly challenge, and that soft challenge is to ask the question why.
Yeah,
but not once. Sometimes you have to ask it 2 or 3 times to get into the why. Because if someone says, "I don't do retainers," the response you might get, Joe, is what you say. What? Well, why is that? Company policy. Company policy. Why is that? So there's the second why. Well, it just, it's just the company policy.
It just is.
It is, yeah, okay. Well, can I ask why you think that might be? Is it, may I suggest, is it that actually you've had a bad experience with a retained assignment before? And that's normally the real reason why. So when you find out the reason why, then you can address it. Because it can't just be company policy. We just don't do retainers. Okay, so you're not interested in finding the best people in the marketplace. Well, we are. Well, you're not, because you're cutting off a channel, because a retained assignment is a full search, not a database shuffle. So you've got to be able to stand up to the client. This isn't, again, goes back to the mindset point, Joe. But when you ask those questions about saying, so if you've had a bad experience, let me ask, what happened? And normally it didn't succeed. We didn't find the person. And then again, I'm talking from an intro perspective here, so apologies for that. And just say, well, did they share with you the process I've just shared with you? That transparent process that's there. And when you do that, then obviously they say, well, no. And say, well, actually, as I've shared with you, we're going to talk about a closing technique, Joe, I think, for, once you've got to the end of your proposition, that 4-stage close we talk about. It actually does soften it. But if you go in with the mindset that actually this is the way to do it, all of a sudden, and I know with our process, clients see why they should pay you. Or not pay you, why they should retain you, to sort of take you through that process. And that's I think that's a really important thing.
We're I haven't placed these books here, by the way, where they should be, so you can see on that side there. So again, the book here, Start with the Why, Simon Sinek. Andrew, I know, thanks for your comments, everybody. So Andrew said that I found that if you ask why they don't do retained, it's easy to handle the objection. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, why is an uncomfortable question. It's uncomfortable for us. We don't like asking it. We have psychological barriers to asking the question why, but we need to get over that, own it. It's, ask the question why, because you're absolutely right. We used to call it peeling the onion. The more questions you ask and the more why questions you ask, the more you'll get down to the root cause of why they are working in a certain way. And half the time there isn't really a logical reason why. A lot of the times, and again, when they say company policy, it is what it is, this is how we work, it's either because they've, like you said, they've had a bad experience, or because it's a defense mechanism. It's a defense mechanism to stop people like us from getting through. But it's not until they get to know us and realize that we are different from the other people who they've met with or the sales calls that they have had. So I genuinely believe, Plowman said it there, the consequences of inaction. Absolutely. We talk about fear is a great motivator. The thing about fear is you don't want to scare these people half to death. You don't want to make them feel terrible about their own recruitment process, but you do need them to see that their current recruitment process is fundamentally broken. It's normal. It's what they do, but it's not optimal. It's not working. It's just that half the time they can't see that. And it's not until you ask a few questions and you do consult with the client. Stop calling it client meetings. The best way to overcome an objection is to preempt it, to neutralize it, to stop it from happening in the first place. And a client meeting, for those of you who are still going on them, congratulations. I know a lot of recruiters are just trying to sell over the phone now. And if you want to build long-term business relationships with people, you're not going to do it off a 5-minute phone call. So please do start bringing client meetings back into the relationship building part of this. So I used to be head of recruitment for a really big, large mobile phone company. And I used to have agencies pitching me constantly. And I always thought that pitch was a direct reflection of how hard they were then going to work should they then work with me moving forwards. If this is how hard you're going to work trying to get my business, imagine how hard you're going to work when you've got my business. So I think the harder you work at this point, you're selling your services in real time and you're demonstrating it. So, prevention is better than cure. the lead up to the close is critical, really. You can position your close way more effectively, but in the first 80% of the meeting, by asking these questions, to identify the problems that this client has got or has had or foresees having in the future with their process, with their people, and with their PSL, and harvesting all of those problems. The more problems you find, the more pains you're going to uncover. Impact. We have to talk about impact. What is the impact of that problem to your business, Mr. Client? Because once it's hurting them professionally or personally, it's going to help to motivate change, because their current comfort zone now isn't as comfortable as it was 25 minutes ago when you started the meeting. When you then get to the point where you're presenting, because we have a 5-stage client meeting process, I think we've gone through this in a previous session. When you get to the presentation of your services, you are presenting your services and your service methodology, but directly into those pains that you've uncovered during the meeting. So by the time you've presented what you do for a living, how well you do it, how you're different, that client should be starting to think in their heads, A, I need this, B, I really want it, C, this person looks like a nice person, I now feel like I know them and like them and trust them a little bit because we've spent some time together, but also this is starting to sound a little bit expensive. So by the time you get to the point where you're going to close them, the client should close themselves at this point and either say, so how do I get all of this then? Or how much is this going to cost me? So the easiest way to get to the close is to get the client ready to buy rather than you just do it when you're ready to sell. And what this does is it helps to prevent, or it helps to reduce the number of objections, knee-jerk face value objections that you get towards the beginning and the middle of a situation. You're starting to circumnavigate them, really. You're not giving clients the opportunity to object to what you're saying, because everything you're saying you do solves the problems that you've just uncovered. One of the questions that I think is really good for helping with objection handling, again, prevention rather than cure, before you get to the point of telling them, so we've done problem uncovering, then we're going to present what we do for a living. Before you do that, just ask one tiny little question in between, because we already know they use agencies. We already know the agencies charge 18%. You're going to ask for significantly more than that in a minute and on a retainer. So they've got current agencies, 18% contingent, all these problems. The bridge between qualification and presentation, and to try and just soften some of these objections, is to ask at that point, before I tell you a little bit more about what we do, Mr. Client, can I just ask, based on what we've discussed already, what have your current agencies done to help you with this thus far? And just allow that to stay there, because what they're now doing, that client is now seeing or devaluing the current service that they're getting with their current agency on contingent, on a lower service. So when you then tell them what you do and how great it is and how different it is and how it's going to solve all their problems, and you tell them it's on a retainer and you say it's on a higher fee, they should be able to see the difference. You may still get we don't do retainers. Do you know what? That's fine. Welcome that objection. Allow them to, you might need to help them to just exhaust that emotional reaction to that objection. But then you should be able to get to the whys. Why don't you do retainers, etc., etc. So prevention is way better than cure, I think. And a lot of the hard work.
Doing that, you're trying to eliminate the amygdala hijack, Joe. You're actually trying to say, actually, logically, you're showing these people the steps, and in their brain, it's all starting to make sense. And I said, why wouldn't I do this? And then, oh, hang on, I'm being, transfixed. This person's, mesmerizing me. Hang on, and that's when the objection might come back. But they're throwing out now in a little bit of a softer tone. They just want to make sure they can say to their colleagues, "Oh, I did say, why don't you do it?" And they said to me, "I wouldn't be able to get this type of service unless I did this." Now, it's sort of coming across to them in that particular point to get them to think through what you said, and the pleasure and pain, the push and pull that we spoke about there is to help them understand logically that actually your solution is there, but you do have to either preempt it, by raising it. I think, as Andrew said, raise the objection first of all, or ask the questions why they don't do retainers, or just bring it up and say, And then we're going to talk about, it's the close in that's the fifth part of our sales meeting, Joe. The close is to help people understand that's when you're going to unearth the real objections, because that's when you're going to get down to the commercials. We all know the objection is going to be about how much money you charge and in what stage your payments are and so on. So we've got to help clients understand that, when you come down to that, you start to. And so I just want to sort of share, part of the closing techniques, which will elicit the objections and then how to handle those. So the first thing is, before you start your presentation, Joe, when we talk about that 5 stages, when we talk about, first impressions, rapport building, qualification, presentation, and then you come into the closing side of things. Just before you start your presentation, you should say to the client, when I'm just about to share with you now how our service is different. And what I want you to think about whilst I'm going through this part of the meeting is I want you to think about what I'm saying and compare that to what you currently get from the recruiters you work with. Yeah, so that's the first thing. That's the setup. And then when you come to your close, the first part of your closing technique is to say, okay, Mr. Client, Mr. and Mrs. Client, I asked you to compare the service. How do we stack up against the other recruiters? Is it better or worse? What would you think? And that's it. When we're in closing now, we're not there asking open-ended questions, the who, what, why, whens, and hows. We're actually asking very direct questions because we want a direct response. We don't want to skirt around the edges. So how does it compare? Is it better or worse? Now, they might say, I think it's the same, in which case you failed.
Yes, go back.
Go back. If they say worse, you've definitely failed, and there may be no way back. But anyway, the reality is when we talk about that with our intro clients, and let's say if you do want to sort of catch up with us, please do click on the link that will appear later. We actually sort of get clients say, actually, I think that's a lot better. And then the fear, the emotion starts coming because they actually sort of say, oh my God, I'm saying, yes, I like you. Mm-hmm. Oh dear, and I've got to push back. So you can then move on to the next stage. And by the way, you can push the what did you like specifically about what I do? Again, you're reinforcing the pleasure of doing business with you, and get them to say a couple of things. And when they say, oh, I like this part, let's say if you're using psychometrics as we do, or behavioral assessment, what did you like about that? Push a bit further, just to reinforce why you're different. That's great. So then he said, so is there any reason why you wouldn't engage me to work with you on this assignment? And it's stumm. And you're waiting for and I know we said in the pretext from the preamble for this today, Joe, we talked about yeses. Actually, here's where you can get a no, but it's a positive no. Is there any reason why you wouldn't engage me to work with you on this assignment? No reason. Great. But, and there's always the but that's going to come in, which is when we get to how much does it cost? Okay. And that's to say, well, as I've shared with you today, during this presentation, we put in a substantial amount of time and effort, and to engage me to deliver this service on your behalf, we only work with clients on an exclusive retained basis. Is that okay with you? And now
and they'll go, well, it's changed, it's different, but it's worth it. It's changed, it's different, but it's worth it.
Absolutely. But that challenge is all about confidence. Is that okay with you? Or worse, so again, a very direct and closed question. And again, keep quiet. And they're trying to come up with reasons, but thinking, no, I just said I like this. They just tell me why I like it. Well, but what does a retainer mean? They may not understand retainer, because remember, this is recruiter language. And so what does the retainer work? Well, actually, we work with clients on a 3-part basis. We take a third of our fee on engagement, so we can deliver the service that you've just seen. We take a third when we've actually presented the shortlist and you've accepted the shortlist from you. So that actually you can see that, because that's the majority of my work done. And the final third is, of course, on successful contract with the potential employee that you're going to take on. Is that okay? But how much does it cost? Now, you'll have your own fee structure, so I'm just going to give a closing question here. But, now it might be, well, we don't do retainers at this stage. So forget the money for the moment. And that's when you've got to go back and do that challenge. Well, why? Why don't you do retainers? Is it, do they do this? Did you not agree that actually you said you like this type of service and I can't deliver it on a contingent basis? And you may have to educate the client to say that, you may not understand this, but when you engage multiple agencies, or even just where you think you're dealing with one agency, statistically, they only fill 1 in 5. Yeah. So they've got to work on 5 vacancies. So you're only getting 20% of their effort because they don't know which one's going to come in. You engage me to do this work for you. I do all of it. So you've got to handle objection. You've got to answer that question. You've got to educate the client. And then the final part, then saying, the fees. Of course, the fees. It's subject to the fees. The fees for this level of service, which includes, and this is what we'd say at iIntro, which includes our full 12-month free replacement service, is 28% of the first year's annual salary package. How does that sound? And you're going to get a sucking of teeth, or
well, that's more than we're paying now.
I've had that one. I actually had one client say to Joe, one of the first times I pitched iIntro, said, They just looked really good, but we've never paid more than 35%. And I know people listen, they've got people pay 35%. Yes, at senior level search, people do pay those type of numbers. So when you say that, you're going to get objection. Well, that's too much money.
Yeah.
I've never paid 28% before. We've never, and you probably know this already because they told you. We only currently pay 18%, Joe, as you said earlier. And so you've got to be able to handle that objection. So the way I would handle that objection, and that you can sometimes come at this from a different point. I've said my fee up front. There are other people who say, well, how much do you think this service is worth? And get the client to name a fee. But if you've said 18%, Joe, I'd simply say to you, okay, well, so you're currently paying 18%. You told me you like this type of service. How much more would you be prepared to pay for this type of service?
Yeah.
And let the client come up to you, and they'll come close, and you can then negotiate on that fee. But we talk about the levers to negotiate. Joe, I've just realised this half hour's flown through.
Do you know, we could have done more on this, and I think we probably need to, because objection handling and closing, I think, goes hand in hand. I mean, Andrew's made a brilliant point. Could you ask the questions, what do you look for with your agency? What do you want done differently in order to take us on a retained basis? Absolutely. We aren't mind readers. Recruitment consultant or management consultant does not translate to psychic medium. We don't automatically know. I mean, we know a lot from evidence and experience of working with multiple clients what good looks like and what great looks like, but we don't necessarily know what's going to add value to this client. So you have to ask the question. Absolutely. What would great look like? What could we do differently? What would do you wish your agencies did, but they don't? Because when you then tell them what you do, lo and behold, it's only what they've told you that they really need and want in their business. So yeah, absolutely. And these are really good, honest, upfront, wholesome questions, I'd say, that we just don't ask. I genuinely don't think that we ask them much, really, as recruiters. And Palmer's made a brilliant point there. And this is why I think we have to do this, more of this session, change the focus of the conversations towards the reduction of the cost of acquisition as opposed to the cost of recruitment. Absolutely. Clients are very, very focused on fee for two reasons. Firstly, sometimes it's the only thing they've got to differentiate you on because you're all the same. So that's our fault. Yeah. It's our fault that that's what they do. But secondly, because they see that upfront cost as being the only cost implication to recruitment. What you show them by asking them questions is actually, Mr. Client, 25 or 28% is nothing compared to the hundreds of thousands of pounds you're losing every year through the long processes, your attrition rates, the amount of people that you're losing, all those pains that you found earlier on in the process normally have pound signs on them. It's a cost to the business. So what's 28% compared to tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of savings further down the line? But again, this means that as recruiters, you've got to extend your reach past trying to sell to just get their jobs and into, we want to be your recruitment partner, your outsourced recruitment partner, working with you long term to enable the growth of your business through the recruitment and retention of awesome people. Great. That's worth 28% in my book anyway.
Indeed. Joe, listen, this has been a great session, and there's a lot more to talk about. So we're going to pick this up again in a few weeks. Obviously, the next couple of weeks, we've got guests lined up. So next week, we've got David Perry from Perry Martell. And remember, it's at 3 p.m. So if you're tuning in, we won't be around at 9:30. The following week after that, we're going to be talking about marketing. So we've got a special guest. We've got the marketing director from iIntro coming on board, a guy called Finn Patrick. And there'll be lots of other sessions, but we will need to pick this one up. But if we can help you at all, please do get in touch. Click on the link and book some time with us. So we're a little bit overrunning, which we haven't really done before in the past, but that's because we got so excited. My amygdala got hijacked. And we're going there. So thank you very much for listening. We appreciate your time and effort to do this with us. So thank you very much for your time. So it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Bye-bye. See you next week, hopefully.
Bye.